a pattern emerged. Grapplers generally owned the strikers, who were mostly traditionalists and purists with no knowledge of grappling whatsoever. It was embarrassing for the traditionalists. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu emerged from obscurity to become the most well-known and well-respected styles that prepared people for MMA fights. Karate, Kung Fu, and other traditional arts were starting to be seen as inferior. Because of the influence the early UFC had, a lot of new students rushed to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Sambo, wrestling, submission grappling, and shoot fighting. From this pool of talent came the next generation of UFC fighters. This new generation of fighters understood the value of grappling and especially ground fighting. At the same time, right after UFC 1, there were many local MMA venues opening up all over the US, Canada, and the UK. It was in these local competitions where the new generation of fighters got their first fights. Every now and then, traditional stylists such as Kung Fu fighters would enter these local MMA competitions, but they generally didn't win without grappling skill. Then the UFC changed a bit. It became more selective. Instead of allowing anyone to enter the UFC, they would only look at fighters who had fought and won in local MMA competitions. They were looking for the best fighters, not the best stylists. Kung Fu stylists generally would not be able to win those fights enough to be recognized by and brought into the UFC to fight. And now forward to today. There are local, regional, national, and international MMA competitions everywhere. There are now enough fighters to have organizations other than just the UFC, but the UFC is seen as the organization with the most elite competitions. So, your best bet for seeing how Kung Fu stylists do in MMA is to actually look for stuff outside of the UFC or any other national or regional MMA organizations. These would be local MMA competitions, cage matches, tough man competitions, etc. Only there will you see newcomers with no fight history being allowed to fight, and so you sometimes can see Kung Fu fighters. Why though would Kung Fu stylists not do well in MMA fights? The answer is, you perform the way you are trained. It's not about the style, it's not about the techniques, it's how you train that matters. Kung Fu training rarely involves non-compliant, live partners who are trying their best to win against you in matches that allow all three ranges of combat: free fighting, clinch, and ground. If you don't train with people who are trying their best to take you down to the ground and submit you, you won't know how to handle that when the time comes to defend yourself from it. If you've never trained with partners who are allowed to grab you, throw you, kick you in the legs, punch you in the face, etc., then you'll be lost in a competition that allows those techniques. It's even worse if you train in a style that doesn't even do competition at all. This happens in many Kung Fu schools. In those styles, you're either just doing forms and punching to the air, or maybe you're lucky enough to have some partnered activities, but the partnered stuff is compliant and not live. By compliant, I mean that your partner is not resisting you. He's just letting you do stuff. He might throw a punch, for example, and then he stops and lets you do any number of crazy things to him. You might grab his wrist and yank at it until it locks his arm, and then you perform a standing arm bar, but he lets you do that. He doesn't try to pull his wrist away when he sees you reaching for it. He doesn't try to keep his elbow from being locked. And by live, I mean that your partner is thinking and able to change what he's doing on the fly to make you aware of your problems. He's not just a robot programmed to do one thing and stop. A live partner will not stop after he throws that first punch. He'll do another punch when he sees that you're too open on one side. He'll try to trip you when he sees that your stance is too wide, etc. The most live a partner can be is during a sparring session where things are done completely at random and you have no idea what your partner will do next. Another aspect to this training is speed and power. It's easy to practice trapping a punch and counter-striking to the face when things are slowed down, but speeding it up and adding power might show you that your elegant drill simply doesn't work at that point. People who train in Kung Fu styles have a lot of excuses and reasons why they don't train the way MMA trains. The most common reason they claim is that their techniques are too deadly for competition. They also disagree that ground fighting should be developed at all because it would give students bad habits. They basically claim that being on the ground is dangerous in real life for a variety of reasons: mobility, multiple attacker scenarios, broken glass and used hypodermic needles, etc. They would rather put all of their training into learning how to fight on their feet instead. And they even dislike the notion of sport fighting, claiming that violates the principle of Wu Dai, martial ethics and code of conduct. For these and other reasons, they seldom even consider fighting in MMA competitions. Another thing to realize about Kung Fu is that the styles are highly revered by their students and teachers, almost taking on religious significance. Criticizing any aspect of your Kung Fu style is just not done. Kung Fu practitioners have faith that the traditional old ways of training are the best, that their instructors are always right, and that their particular branch of Kung Fu is the best. Each style passes down oral histories of their founders that make them sound near godlike. They talk about proponents of their style that once fought 30 people at a time and won, for example. And since their styles are generally thought to be perfect, it means that if anyone does poorly using it in a fight, it's because that person just didn't train hard enough, wasn't very good at it, or may have some sort of character flaw, laziness, egotistical, selfishness, etc. So, convincing Kung Fu stylists that they need to train a different way or to start entering MMA competitions to test their skill is an uphill battle. It's just not very likely to happen on a large scale. Incidentally, MMA is just starting to take root in China. It's unknown at this time how successful it will be at attracting students in a culture that's so deeply embedded in Kung Fu. We all would love to see a pure Kung Fu stylist come into the MMA world and succeed. That would be amazing. There's no technique that you can see in MMA fights that isn't already in Kung Fu. But like I said, it's not the technique that matters, it's the way you train. For that reason, I doubt you're going to see any pure Kung Fu fighters go very far in MMA. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to NC Krolek's YouTube channel.